Guys, welcome again to another episode of Conversations with Roland, show whereby I, Roland, the author of the book Who and Why You Are, brings guests to come in and discuss the myriad different ways in which they view life and how they appreciate the diversity of life. And my goal essentially is to get all of us to appreciate these different perspectives and help us remember who and why we really are. And today I believe that we are these infinite beings having a temporary experience here on Earth designed to help us experience and express an infinite array of things and appreciate this diversity. And today I am really excited to have my next guest, Aaron Force. That's Aaron, Aaron. Force, he's talking to me this evening from Washington, Gold Bar, Washington. It's a small town in Washington State. Aaron and I connected on Twitter, and I was very actually fascinated by his Twitter posts right after I joined Twitter about a year ago. And this was following my awakening and trying to get into marketing and connecting with people who had what I believe was an awakened consciousness. And Aaron definitely has that. He's on Twitter, and his posts are super amazing. And he's here with me. He'll talk to you about that some more, as well as some other projects that he's working on. Father of three. He's definitely a beautiful soul, and one of the first people to read my book. So, Aaron, I am super honored, super happy to have you on today to just have a conversation, share some of your goals, what you're working on, and just chat. So how are you doing?
Roland, I'm doing fine, and thank you very much for inviting me on here. You say it's an honor, but for me, it's definitely an honor. And yes, it was it was an honor as well to be one of the first people to read your book. And I was very impressed with what I saw, and a lot of things resonated with me very deeply. And so we had a conversation after that, and I think we kind of became mutual twinsies in a sense in terms of this concept of awakening and what it means for life, for us and for others. And so again, thank you very much.
No, it's my pleasure, man. I mean, yeah. I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. I like the idea of being twinsies with someone online.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's sweet, and I appreciated your feedback from the book. I loved it, and you also actually gave a quote which I used to market the book. But one of the cool things after the conversation we had that I really quite remember was your story of how you actually ended up having this conscious awareness that you're currently using to do your work. And it was different from how I ended up with this awareness, which is one reason why I'm really fascinated by our journeys here on Earth. Like, there is no one path to eventually attaining this knowledge. And even beyond that, there's way more. But your story and mine were really different. They were very different experiences. And I know it. And I mean, you're here. This would be a good time to kind of share it and let the listeners know who Aaron Force is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and I was really taken by your story because it was entirely different than mine and my experience. And it is exciting to see that there are so many different paths that we're all on, and the fact that they can be so drastically different. Because if I believe correctly, your awakening was more of an energetic type of process that occurred after some strong meditation and some interesting experiences with that. Mine was not like that at all. Now, I'm fascinated by yours because I haven't heard very many stories like that. I know it is a thing. I know it exists, but I don't have any personal experience with it. So mine, yes, it was definitely different. It was what I think would more or less be called a spontaneous type awakening. That's what I call it anyway. That I wasn't really doing anything at all spiritually, and I certainly wasn't looking at all to awaken, because I didn't even know, Roland, that it was a concept. Whereas I think on your end, you may have had an inkling, at least you were meditating, you were doing some of those things. I was not doing anything like that. A little bit of background on me is, since the time I was an early teenager, I've been an evangelical Christian, right? So, okay, so you see where I'm going with that. That wasn't necessarily a type of thing that we all typically do, is look for alternative kind of spiritual paths and that type of thing. It just doesn't happen. So it was completely not even on my radar, but I kind of like that because it made it really, really profound, for one, because it just struck me like a freight train. It was more gentle than that, but it was a very profound experience. And I also like it because people can look at me, I think, or at least I can feel confident knowing that I had a really authentic experience. So in other words, I'm not really somebody that, not that there are people like this, there might be people like this that are out there, that they're in the kind of the spiritual practice and they sort of lull themselves into thinking, I'm awakened, or I'm some kind of enlightened master or something like that. And I had none of that. This thing was just sprung on me, and very exciting for me. Completely life-changing, extremely profound in terms of its effect on my life. Because this was an event that happened, I say it was in the spring of 2015, I think. And I don't actually know when it was, because I had no clue what had happened. It wasn't like I was taking dates or anything, Roland. But it was a time in my life of really pretty profound suffering. Suffering not of things that were happening to me, but more of the internal kind of turmoil that some of us find ourselves in life. And I'd been there a few times in my day, but at that particular point in my life, it was starting to get kind of rough again. It was definitely a valley, kind of a low point experience for me. And I didn't know who I was, what I was doing. I felt horrible about it. I felt pathetic, quite honestly, in terms of where I was in life and who I was, and right in the thick of midlife, basically. So on top of it, I sort of think I was having a midlife crisis, to be honest with you. But that was all good in a way. It was such a painful time, Roland, that I remember praying to God to just take me, to end me, give me cancer, just do anything. So that at least I know my family would have life insurance. You know what? I mean, I didn't want to kill myself, but it was that point of despair. It was pretty pathetic, like I said. But that, in these types of awakenings, seems to be, because I've done a lot of study since then, obviously, we call that one form of internal suffering. And I know a lot of your listeners, I'm sure of, at least if they're not experiencing that right now, they've had some point, or they know somebody who has been in that scenario. And it's not fun. But those were the circumstances and the background for this awakening. And from there, I think there's some interesting things that may occur with awakenings and why they happen with that suffering. And I think there's some enormous possibilities for individuals and even for humanity as a whole. Because I think we're in a period of time that we can all see that globally we've got a lot of suffering that's out there that we can look at. And I would have to say, I think in a weird sort of way, it's almost a blessing in disguise, because I think these enormous types of internal discord, the types of things that we see in life, they open the door for us to somehow nudge aside and find ourselves in that greater awareness that is awakening. So that is a great deal of my study and my interest, I think, at this point, is figuring out what happened there and what does it mean for other people as well.
Yes.
Mm.
Thanks for sharing, Aaron. You said a lot, and you said a lot. Right at the end there, you kind of broke off, and I think you mentioned something about the ego being sort of
Mm.
a part of the suffering that we experience, having to do with our ego, and then
Right.
you're working now to see how awakening can help us as individuals work with our ego, which is a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah, and I would
Yeah.
like us to talk about the ego down the road, but your story is very reminiscent of a lot of awakening stories that I have read about or spoken to people who have had
Mm.
the experience, where there's usually some sort of suffering or pain or feeling of not being worthy enough. And
Mm-hmm.
for the different people, there's certainly different degrees of this experience of not being worthy or pain or depression that we all go through. Even I went through it. And I also appreciated you saying that your awakening was pretty much gentle. And that's an interesting perspective to have, because I have the same about mine. I thought mine was super gentle because after my
Mm-hmm.
awakening, I was still able to function in society, pretty normally, right? I've heard stories of people who have gone through awakenings, and that perspective shift has been so drastic that they've not been able to differentiate reality from quote
Mm.
illusion,
Right.
and have not been able to function. And one of them was somebody that I actually watched a lot of his YouTube videos when I started having my experiences in meditating. And like me, he was a pharmacist as well.
Mm.
And he talked about um, after having his awakening, he couldn't work as a pharmacist just because of the experiences he was having that were beyond his ability to sort of control.
Mm.
And he was hearing other people's thoughts. He was seeing visions. He was
Mm.
very emotionally unstable just because all these fears and emotional experiences that he had sort of bottled down were now coming up to the surface for
Mm-hmm.
consciousness to deal with it, sort of accept or forgive himself so that they could sort of move away. And that was not happening. And his name is actually Vivek Govika. If you go on YouTube, you can see a lot of his videos. But he was someone I tried to reach out to when I started having my experiences, just never connected with him. But other people, and I interviewed Leslie Lupo. She had, an NDE. She basically died.
Oh, wow.
That's how drastic hers was. And some people go through divorces. Some people, get fired from their jobs. Other people have major trauma that
Mm-hmm.
kind of forces them to just look at reality and ask, is what I am putting my worth towards actually worthy of it, or is there something else? And usually when that happens and you see that all of it can be taken away from you somehow just really easily, it kind of jolts you to awaken and say, oh, what else is going on here? If this can happen to me, maybe I should kind of turn my life around. Or
Sure.
yeah. So, but yours is super gentle. And if you can you tell us how that actually happened for you? What you were doing, where you were?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it is good that you kind of reiterated that it was sort of this gentle happening, because I've read too of some cases of people where it was traumatic almost, and where they almost wanted to reverse the cycle. Either they wanted to back up out of it, and that was always perplexing to me. I couldn't quite understand that, because that wasn't really my experience. But so again, there are so many different ways that this is going to play out for people. And I think this is a beautiful thing that you're doing, is to try and explore all those different methods and means that happens. But yes, going back to my experience, it was it was an evening just after work, and my wife and I had gone to a friend of ours' house, and it seemed to me that night my wife was wanting him to, because he's kind of a car guy. He's one of those guys, Roland, that can sort of just do anything he sets his mind to, and it always works, right?
Yeah,
you can fix anything. Yeah, you can make anything. I'm not that. No, I am not that. Right. So, and there's another really pathetic story I have that even led up to this beforehand, where I was trying to fix a toilet in my house. Like I told you about this, I called it the toilet from hell. All I had to do, it was leaking, right? All I had to do was replace the, you get a kit. You go down to the Home Depot or Lowe's and you get a flush tank kit. All you gotta do is replace it, right? Well, it took me like a week of smashing my head against the wall to get this thing to work. And that was right before this time, right? So I'm already feeling like, just a pathetic oaf. And so we go to meet Jeff, because Julie, my wife, she's got this friend's, let's say it was like a Bronco Blazer, something like that she was selling. She wanted him to look at it and see if it was going to be a decent vehicle, right? And Jeff's really kind of an imposing person. Okay, so wonderful guy. He'd die for anybody, but you just have to know Jeff. And so I was already feeling a little just embarrassed at myself, but now my wife and I are meeting him because I don't even know how to check this vehicle out, right? To see if it's a good car for her. Okay, so we do that, and okay, I'm feeling a little bit smaller. So we go into his house, which is also his place of business, and he is a coffee roaster, right? And so he's showing us this brand new machine, state of the art, and just kind of going on about how he's forecasting his business for the next year, 5 years, and just all this awesome stuff that's happening for him in his life, right? And I'm happy for him on one hand, right? And on the other hand, I'm feeling like, okay, gosh, I haven't done anything in life, man. I haven't done anything cool. I just am feeling so pathetic about myself. And what makes it worse in a sense is Jeff, he's a felon, right? So prior to this time, he had just gotten out of prison for maybe a year and a half or two. Okay. And prior to that, he served, I want to say like 28 years. Hardcore time. What's that?
28 years in jail.
Yes, in prison, hardcore time. So here, the backstory of this is that, so, I'm already feeling kind of low, like I can't really make anything happen in life. Well, so Jeff's been away in prison, and he comes out in about a year and a half, or maybe it was 2 years. He's just got this business that's going gangbusters, and he's got all these plans, and maybe you can see where I'm going with it. I just kept feeling smaller and smaller and smaller. And it seemed to me that we stepped outside and we're all talking, and something hit me. It was right then at that moment. Okay, so here I am. I've just been having this lower than life feeling, and it was really intensified right at this point. I was to the point of shame, right, to myself. I was ashamed of myself for my wife, and even for Jeff that I was there, and I was just feeling like a nobody. But something happened, and I can't quite even describe it, but it felt like a washing over me of a new awareness of clarity, basically, I think. And that was about it. That was what led up to the experience, and that was the experience. And all of this time, these years since then, have been basically this sort of progress, exploration, everything in terms of what that event meant, what it meant for me, what it means for others individually, what it means for humanity collectively. And it, again, in that clarity, that sense that I knew a bit more who I was, that I wasn't maybe who I thought I was. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so going from there, that person that I thought I was, that was the ego. That was my conditioned state, my thoughts, my beliefs, including the thoughts and beliefs that were very negative and hostile towards myself and life. Those things were all sort of similarly packaged for me right then. And I was confronted. Maybe that was it, Roland. I was sort of confronting the shadow that you just never investigated before. It was all right there, pushed up in my face. And it happened. Now, so I did not know for a long time after that. We're talking several months, maybe 5-6 months. I did not even know what happened, although I explored it religiously, trying to figure it out. Here's what I thought had happened. And it did happen, actually. But what I thought had happened was that I had received a calling to somehow write, because mind you, I'm a contractor. I work with bids and project management and that type of a thing. I've never been a writer, but there was a point when I was, I think in 7th grade, I'd read Jack London's Call of the Wild, and I thought, wow, that would be cool to be a writer someday. Well, fast forward how many ever years into the future, and it hit me, I'm going to be that writer. And I'm going to help people, and I'm going to motivate the world, and I'm going to save everybody, and this and that. I mean, it was just this calling. But unfortunately, between you and me and Roland and everybody else, I had no idea what that calling was at the time. And I certainly didn't know until months later that really what had happened was, yes, I was called, but also more fundamentally, I had this awakening experience where I had somehow transcended the ego by way of that manner of suffering. So
this is super fascinating, Aaron. I'm not kidding. This is fascinating.
Yeah.
You basically had an awakening by listening to somebody tell you about their life.
Yeah, about how good their life was.
Yeah. Like, do you know how many people would be listening to this and feel kind of envious in a way? Which, in listening to you, it sounded like there was some of that, right? You walk into Jeff's place and you're feeling envious that this person's got it, like kind of like Stacy's mom. Jeff's got it going on.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Jeff's got it going on, and you're thinking, man, I just feel worthless. I can't even change a freaking toilet
tank. I know, right?
And then he's talking to you, and you have your awakening experience, which, by the way, anyone who's listening and not having an awakening, I'm speaking from my own experience. Awakening is a shift in perspective that you can't literally go back from. Like, you end up looking at the same things, but you see them differently, which is kind of what you talked about. You just had that shift in perspective, which you didn't even realize or understand for months afterwards. But you have that change in perspective that lets you realize what your ego is and kind of the role it's playing for you. But on top of that, which I find very, very reminiscent of my experience, is a feeling of a purpose or a calling, right? And it's, I gotta write, or I gotta tell people, or I gotta empower people to create the life that they wish for themselves, to sort of take the power back into their own hands, or to help themselves feel whole. And that was my own experience. It was through meditating, and I had this awakening. And for an entire week, I was on a high, but I knew that I had to tell everybody, right? And I tried to do that as a pharmacist, and people thought I was like high on drugs. I am not.
Yeah, you were taking some of the medication, weren't you? That's what they said.
Yes, they did. And that's the number one rule of being a business person, or if you're a drug supplier, right? You don't want to take your own. Don't get out of your own supply. You get a fail, right? So I just had this new perspective on life that seemed to make everything make sense and bring everything to a head. And I was trying to explain it to people, but my craft was awful. I annoyed so many people. But then I knew that I had to sort of give this message out, which is why I ended up writing the book Who and Why You Are. But just like you, this is super fascinating. I was not a reader. I never ever thought I would write a book.
Mm-hmm.
I had one person in my life tell me to write a book, and the book they wanted me to write was about my journey leaving Cameroon, moving to the United States, sort of assimilating and learning the new culture and going to school and all that jazz. And I thought, this is so boring. Do you know how many people have moved to Cameroon and assimilated? Why would my story stand out over all of this? That was the very first time I ever even entertained the idea of writing a book. And I quickly shut it down based on my fears and beliefs at the time. And after my awakening, literally it was, my first draft was one weekend. I had all this information.
Wow.
I'm not kidding. There's 75 pages all out. And that's kind of what you're working on now. And you're doing a lot. Like your Twitter feeds are one of my favorite to read. I usually go and I say, like, Aaron's got something.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, either a quote or a message of hope, of awakening. It's usually awakening, and expanding your consciousness. And one of the things I feel when I read them is, if someone hasn't had an awakening and they're reading it, they're just going to say, okay, I'm aware of this, blah, blah, blah. But there's such powerful knowledge in your tweets. And you're also working on different writing projects. I know you have a website with a blog. You have a free ebook that you have out as well. And you're working on some other projects to literally help people achieve their highest potential as human beings here on earth. So I think you're working on your calling, man. That's kind of awesome. Yeah,
it's coming together. It takes time, though. It does take time. Yeah, but that's okay, because I think I've got time. This is my life. This is it from here on out. Now I have to continue to financially support myself in other more conventional ways at the moment, but this will always be the target that I'm moving towards, is this type of exploration and helping people to understand it and figure out what it means. I sure could have used some input when I was going through this to figure out what on earth it was. And
no, I can imagine, especially in 2015, because I mean, that's, I consider myself a new graduate. I just had mine last year, right? I'm finally, it's like, oh, okay, you have this knowledge, but I still don't know so much.
Yeah.
And I can imagine in 2015, that was, when a lot of information that's out now wasn't available, right? People weren't talking about these things, or even talking like this. People didn't maybe have these labels that we're using now, which sometimes is used incorrectly, of course, but that's a different story. So I would imagine it was hard to understand what happened to you, and then even find resources of other people sharing their experience of what happened to them, which was similar.
Right. Yeah, no, I think there were some resources out there for sure, but I didn't know how to connect to them. They just, when you don't know what you're looking for, it's like a needle in a haystack. So
that's a good
that was the problem that I had. So, but anything that I can do to help make this a better experience for people, and maybe even to proactively educate people, I think is key. I think the more that people can become aware of this phenomenon and all the related surrounding issues with it, the better, I think. Because you think of it this way. You said that you went out and you were trying to tell everybody that you knew that this had happened, and you probably got some blank stares back at you. I think in general it would be really nice if there was just more awareness out there, so that people could go, oh, this dude's not crazy. This is what's going on. It's interesting. Even I've read in the psychology or psychotherapy kind of arenas, this happens, right? And people go to their therapist and they're trying to figure out, well, okay, help me. What happened here? And they end up getting prescribed drugs because the therapist doesn't know, doesn't understand this, and that's not what they need at that point. They need some better assistance and understanding. And so that would be one of my goals, I think, is just to see that the general population become more educated about it. We need to raise the awareness of it more. And sure, people might not get it, but at least they'll have a background so that when somebody they know does undergo an awakening experience, or they've got a little bit of background. I think that would be so very helpful as we march forward, in future. So.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
What in my readings, what I came across was called a Kundalini Crisis. That's when you sort of your Kundalini awakens, and then you're having all these symptoms and experiences that you just can't explain. And someone who, I didn't go to medical school, but there was nothing in pharmacy school that prepared me for the experiences I was having, or even currently.
Sure.
Yeah, and so if you came to the hospital and told me that you're able to hear people's thoughts and whatnot, or you can feel energy.
Yeah, what's the
cure? It's except sedate you and say you're schizophrenic and whatnot. So which was actually one of my questions. In your low points, did you ever end up on pharmaceuticals? Is that something you're comfortable sharing?
Oh, yeah. No, I actually, I still take something to kind of take the edge off. Very low dosage, but for several years, probably even just prior to that, I had to have something. Yeah, I really needed something to kind of take that edge off. Yes, and if what you're getting at is even in this period of time of awakening where a lot of that suffering has just disappeared, I've got mental clarity, I know what I'm doing, I got purpose and meaning. I think at times, sometimes we still have, I don't know if they are the chemical imbalances in the brain that can happen. That's at least what my doctor would say. But I take a low dosage just to sort of maintain a little better feel at times, because without it I can struggle. But that part of it has nothing to do with, I think a lot of depression for people is just uncertainty. Well, of course, the self anger, for frustration, for not feeling like you're good enough, you've achieved enough, you know what you're doing in life. Things like just depression because you have no meaning or purpose. I think that's what a lot of depression is. But I think at times we need to not neglect the fact that there still can be kind of some physiological, perhaps, things that occurred. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm always willing to talk about it because I think those types of things need to be addressed more. I always love to see, when they talk about the mental health month or whatever it comes around, I always like to jump on that bandwagon and let people know that, it's perfectly normal and natural to have some of those types of issues. And yes, even when you've awakened, but for the most part, a lot of that heartache is gone.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
it is. And thanks a lot for sharing your personal experience and bringing awareness even more so to the challenge that can be dealing with depression. But the one thing you talk about is just because you're awakened doesn't mean you're not going to deal with this. There is a cool thing about awakening, in my experience, is it's not as though it's a cheat code, but it's just an extra tool and a knowledge that you can always fall back on to know that you are way more than the current experiences that you're having, and like everything that you've had since you were born and started to experience life on earth, it's temporary, and then it's designed to teach you something. And with me, when I found myself in those states of quote unquote imbalance, which could manifest in multiple ways, I've always found that retreating back within through meditation, that's how I ended up awakening. So that's my go-to. It's like,
Right.
and everybody gets annoyed with me when if they come and tell me if anything, any ailment they have, my first is meditate. Have you meditated?
Go meditate. Yeah.
I have a headache, Roland. I'm like, you should meditate. Like, you should meditate. Like everything. So,
they want a pill for that, right?
Yeah. And
yeah.
Actually, the best pill is meditation, and I found that has been sort of my go-to for seeing myself through when things aren't moving as I would expect or like, essentially. But we can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
How often do you, or what's your time frame in a given day that you meditate?
So
duration, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Duration, I average about, I would say, 2 hours a day. I do it in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. I get up, I'm usually up by 5 a.m. and I'll meditate for an hour. And then before I go to bed, it's the last thing I do. I meditate and fall asleep while doing it. And then sometimes I'll get up at 2 a.m. and then meditate. It's like every free moment I have, I'm doing it. And if I'm not meditating, if I'm at work, usually I'll try to steal a moment to breathe. That's my daily walking awake. It's not sitting still or it's just breathing and trying to be present, like a full deep breath. So those are that's my go-to. And I'm actually glad you asked that, because I've spoken to so many people about meditating and they think it's super impossible, or they can't do it because they're distracted or their mind and they can't focus. And I honestly, the first day I tried to meditate, it was less than 5 minutes and I passed out. And I didn't even, I did not know I was meditating. I did not know what I was doing. I just had the intention and the desire to lay in my bed and listen to my body. I just wanted to listen to my body and basically learn what my body could teach me. That was it. It was like, okay, well, what can my body tell me? And this was also at a point where I would say, clinically depressed, and kind of frustrated with just life in general. I was in business school and working nights, very tired, just not happy with life. Kind of felt, the same. What am I doing with my life? I could do more. My coworkers were upset with me. There was kind of some drama at work, and then I was stressed.
Sure.
Never saw the sunlight, and I thought, man, I don't know what else to do. I'm kind of like, what's the worst that can happen if I just lay down and listen to my body? What would I learn? That's how it started.
Interesting.
So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Is that what you typically do? Do you carry any thoughts or intentions, or
do I carry any thoughts or intentions? So lately I've begun to work on that, and that's part of my testing, kind of in a Gnostic type belief of seeing how much I can affect my day-to-day life. But usually, unless I'm very specific about something, which you have to be very specific and consistent with, I usually try to heal, and my intention is always to be as relaxed as possible, and then have either my guides or my higher self reveal to me what I need to learn in that moment. Because I've also learned, the more I'm learning about myself and trying to be a lot more in alignment with my higher self, you really do learn that your ego is very good at playing games with you. And until you've learned to kind of overcome the fears that your ego creates and identifies and tries to solve, A lot of times I kind of just step aside with my ego and just let my higher self come through and show me what I need to know. But I work with both. I sometimes will set intentions. Lately, I've been also practicing self-hypnosis for out of body travel or any of that kind of stuff at night when I go to bed. Or even I've tried self-hypnosis for like past life regression stuff. And this sounds crazy. If anyone's listening to this and doesn't believe me, this is absolutely true. This is stuff that is very well documented that you can do. But those are things that I'm working on. And the other piece is it's just healing. When I find out I'm not feeling well, that point mine is to boost my immune system to heal. Then I can use my meditation for that.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm actually really glad that you brought that up about how you're not doing intention so much, but sort of letting your higher self show you the way. And so part of the reason that I asked was I was just curious how your process was relative to mine. And well, first of all, I have to say I don't meditate 2 hours a day. I don't meditate probably 20 minutes a day. But when I do, I get after it. I get in a pretty calm and it's a place, I think, where the ego is set aside, and I really more or less don't intend. I don't push out. I let concepts more or less emerge from deep within. So I don't guide that at all. I just let it. It's probably akin to intuition, I'm guessing, but it's more focused and more attentive to that, I think. And so I get to that place where I try to remove myself as much as possible and allow that higher self to come through. And and it's interesting to hear you talk about the higher self too, because I don't know that everybody has that concept down as well, but I certainly believe that there is a higher self as well. The true or the authentic self that is, for most of us, hidden behind the ego. And once the ego, the ego is kind of it's like a covering or a cap or a manhole cover or something that comes down on top of the higher self or our greater awareness and prevents that basically from coming through. But once the ego is kind of set aside, then that higher self can come through. And I think when we're quiet enough and just allow and listen, it's amazing really what we can hear, the guidance that we can get. It's more of an impression rather than probably necessarily audible words or words in your head. But if you're tuned in and listening or feeling for those impressions, that's powerful stuff. And I think that's what we need to learn to do really as humanity is listen to that rather than try to so much direct what our outward reality is going to be, which is kind of an egoic method really, which is stating my will be done rather than thy will be done. Yeah, kind of thinking. So it's interesting.
No, indeed. I use meditation for a lot of problem solving, but what I at least with my understanding now, and I'm glad you brought up the ego, Aaron, is that so to incarnate on Earth is a brave thing to do for every single one of us. We would not be brave if we didn't decide or accept this sort of, I don't want to say it's a contract or agreement that results in our, soul evolution and in the same way the evolution of the entire consciousness. But we would not be brave at all if we didn't do this. It's a fascinating experience, and we can have one like we're having on Earth anywhere else throughout the cosmos. That's my understanding. And so that's what the ego's role is sort of allowing us to do is have an Earth life experience. And I in my, in my awakening, I view the ego, or I came to learn that the ego was a necessary part of Earth life. You can't escape it ever. And now what I'm trying to do with my meditation is get in alignment my egoic self, and the myriad characters that he plays as Roland the husband, Roland the brother, Roland the pharmacist, Roland the annoying cousin, right? Annoying boss. Is to get all of that in alignment with the lessons that my higher self, which I would equate to my soul, as is trying to learn during this current incarnation. And when those two are in alignment, that's when life becomes super purposeful. And then the challenges and the celebrations are nothing but just temporary validations of your work in progress. And then you start to see them as, okay, this is feedback to improve. This is when I need to slow down or change. This is when I need to build on. But I'm always changing. Even if it's successful, I'm going to continue changing. And the kind of one of the best analogies I mentioned to a group of folks I was working with was that if you can think of life as a video game, and most people know Super Mario Brothers, whether it's Fortnite that everyone's playing right now, is if you can think of Earth as a video game, for your soul to be able to play the game, it needs an avatar or a character, right? And as if you ever play video games, Aaron, you can't play Super Mario Brothers as Aaron. You have to be a character in the world Super Mario Brothers. So you end up picking either Mario or Luigi and playing the game. And same thing for Earth. If your soul wants to come to Earth, you have to pick a character. And that character is going to have egoic limitations. It can't be infinite, right? Mario can't drink water the way you do, or beer, or meditate like you do, right? It's limited to the world of Mario. Mario can only jump and use a turtle to beat the boss, right? And eat mushrooms. Mario isn't eating any pizzas and stuff like that, right? And so it's kind of limited. Same thing here is in that limited world of Super Mario Brothers, you can learn so much about adversity and overcoming your fears and saving a princess and being a hero, even with its limitedness. Same thing on Earth. Your soul comes here, it's limited in its perspectives, but you can do so much without limitations and the struggles of time and moving through fears and overcoming people's prejudices. And I think that that's kind of why we're here is to limit ourselves, but work through it to solve. And if you look at the world at large, barring all the pain and suffering, we have created some really amazing things, right? And you talk about like technology is amazing. Even the religions are amazing creations of a result of our fears and our desires to still feel sort of whole. And I feel like that's where all our creations come from. Even this podcast, it's like I want to help people, and it's making me feel fulfilled. And not that it's not a fear that someone won't feel fulfilled now, but now it's not purposeful, and I'm just giving it back. Like, and you're doing the same with your work. But that's where our ego comes in. It lets us play the Earth Life game. Part of it is the whole amnesia piece that adds to the confusion. But I think our ego, we really do need it on Earth, but we don't want to think that we are entirely our ego. I think that's where we kind of really go astray, is when we don't remember or wake up and think, okay, it's just a character, right? Like if you're playing Mario, you're not just Mario. If you think you're Mario, then you kind of lost, right? So know that you can. It's just a character, and then when you're in alignment with the character, if you're really controlling Mario and he's doing exactly what you're saying, and then it's smooth for Mario, right? He can now beat the game. But if you let Mario go astray, he's just gonna stand there. And then so it's same thing with our higher selves, souls, and our ego is not identifying too much with who or what our ego believes we are, because that's really limiting.
That's interesting. Well, absolutely. I use that same analogy of the avatar too, because it makes so much sense. And the other one that I use sometimes just to sort of help myself sort of remember how it all works is, this is a little bit sci-fi, right? Because I'm a really big sci-fi fan. So in case you didn't know that, but that's my genre. Yeah, I love sci-fi.
Star Trek?
I do like Star Trek. Yeah.
So do I. I've been watching Star Trek on Amazon Prime, and especially after my experience, I am fascinated with how advanced that show was.
Yeah.
Like it was out before I was born, and you can tell this knowledge is old as dirt. I see it, and I'm like, wow, this is what I'm experiencing.
There are so many good sci-fi movies and series on these streaming networks. It's really amazing. So I'm really happy with that. But this analogy that I use sometimes is the idea of the higher self is sort of being this space station, maybe either that or kind of a much farther away home base on some other planet. But they have they want to investigate Earth, right? They want to express and expand on Earth. And so they send an away team. And so the away team is the boots on the ground on Earth. And they take their directives from the headquarters back, or hopefully they do anyway. If they don't, then there's a problem, right? Then they're kind of lost on Earth. And you go a generation or two and nobody remembers why they're there. That type of thing. And I find that a pretty powerful way to think about it, because I think it's really true. I think our higher self is much more non-local. We're not necessarily here in this realm of time and space, although we sort of are in a portal kind of way, right? But our ego is more of this self-concept that's really localized to right here. It's our, as you say, avatar, or maybe our mech, right? Like our mech robot type of thing that we're operating, whatever, that is more of a tool. But the higher self is the one that really understands, has the plan. We just have to find that connection. And in awakening, we kind of rejuvenate that, and we spark that connection again. And in a lot of ways, that's my experience. And I'm kind of jazzed about it because it is kind of sci-fi, at least when I think about it. It's a little bit unworldly, isn't it? I mean, but it's very cool, and I think there's absolutely some truth to it. I don't think it's just a metaphor. I think there's a lot of power in there if you understand how it works. And then I think another thing that you touched on that's really important is, the ego is well, you've probably seen Ryan Holiday has the book Ego is the Enemy. I don't know if you've read that. It's a good read. And I think in a lot of ways, I do say that the ego is the enemy. I know that's controversial to a lot of people, but then if I was to clarify that just one step further, that would be the unconscious ego. I think the ego keeps us unconscious, or in other words, unaware of its presence, or unaware of a lot of things. But if we awaken and we have that higher awareness, and we understand ego, we can recognize ego. At that point, now ego can really become a tool for us. The problem with ego is when it's really unconscious, and we think we're the ego, we think we're whatever we identify with, the thoughts in our heads, the beliefs, our conditioned habits, patterns, behaviors, and all those types of things. That's problematic. And I think in that way, for us individually, and for us collectively, humanity, species-wide, I think that's a problem. And I really kind of think that's where we have ended up with a majority of our problems. It's actually that unconscious ego. Yeah, because that's driven by a belief in separation. And a world that is 7 billion fractured shards of what once was whole or could be whole, there's going to be there are going to be problems with that.
Yeah.
And it's that belief in separation and how that plays out in humanity. facilitates itself in so many ways, whether that be warfare, other power struggles, human atrocities, even our ecological devastation that we have because we've lost our connection with each other and with the earth and with the idea that everything we do has consequences. But in that sense, because the unconscious ego has really driven us to that place, we aren't aware. I think in a lot of ways, once we can identify the ego and be aware of it, or in other words, maybe call it the conscious ego. I don't know what you would call it. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. But at that point, it can be a tool. And with that tool, we can do amazing things. Like some of these other things that are really of interest to me, like advanced technologies and emerging technologies and what that can do for humanity. Right now, it's a little scary. It's really pretty cool because, again, I'm that sci-fi guy. But it's also without a little bit of temperance or wisdom or understanding of our consequences or awareness that we are connected, and we also are connected in a way to all of nature still, that we can, if we go too blindly forward without those types of awarenesses, Roland, I think that's going to pose further problems for us rather than helping things for humanity. So yeah, it's really a concern for me. I really want this idea of a higher consciousness for all of us moving forward. Now, I don't know exactly how that's going to happen. Right? But I think that's something that is just, that's the burden on my heart, I think, is figuring out how does this apply more globally. That concept of awareness and compassion and empathy.
No, you raise a good point, and please don't make the burden entirely yours, because I don't know if you alone can solve it. But I do want to ask you this in relation to that, with what you currently understand about who we are and why we're here on Earth, and how we sort of interact with our ego, and all of that is. Do you actually foresee that Earth could ever be sort of a utopian or a peaceful place where we're all, living with a higher consciousness, and then things are sort of balanced in a non, I guess, I don't want, like, there's without opposites, essentially, where things are just balanced all around?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that question. Because that's really foundational, I think, to what my vision is moving forward. There are a lot of futuristic movements and visions out there right now, right? I'm not sure how much you or your listeners are aware, but transhumanism is a major hot button topic right now. And that's actually moving into the political debate. So we actually, and I'll explain transhumanism a little bit. It's the idea of utilizing emerging technologies like nanotechnology, super biological potentials, what else? Like neural implants, all kinds of things to enhance humanity, the individual human. Yeah.
Elon Musk is working on that with Neuralink.
Yes, he is working on that.
And I have a theory on that, actually.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
Oh well, it's I'll tell you here. Please go. I don't want to interrupt you. That would be.
Oh, okay. No, it's not rude because it's all interesting to me. So, but Elon Musk. Yeah, that's interesting because he's really got his hand, I think, somewhat closeted. Like, people don't necessarily know it, but he's definitely got the transhumanist thing going on where he's got the neural link, but he's also associated with a lot of people who kind of think through these future scenarios for what humanity might look like. And so, pushing that envelope, we become, the idea of transhumanists is we're more than human. we're not post-human. There's a post-humanist philosophy too, which is basically we're so beyond human you can't even call a person a human anymore. Essentially, they've lost all their traits. They might be uploaded consciousness in the cloud or something like that in the future. And that's sci-fi stuff. But what's amazing to me is the number of really brilliant minds that are working on this and saying that it will be a reality. That's not just a matter of when, but that it will be. And so you got the transhumanist future concepts where anybody could be, there might be purists, there might be people that remain fully human in a sense. You might have people who are cyborgs. You might have people that are, if the technology does get there, they're uploaded intelligences into the cloud, merging into sort of one master hive mind. And again, that's actually, we've got political candidates now that are transhumanists, and their visions are like that. So that's one scenario. And you mentioned what sort of this idea of consciousness in the future, and that's one of my passions, I think, that I try to research and sort of figure my way through, is what that might look like. And yeah, I think it's possible that could be one scenario for humanity, whereby we've somehow figured out how to sort of compel an awakening to happen, maybe. I don't know if that's possible. Either that, or I tend to think, in a way, because of my experience, my research, it seems to be that awakenings are happening more often and to more people. Maybe the universe itself is sort of driving this evolution of consciousness in humanity. But one way or another, I think I certainly would love to see that as a reality, that we would move beyond our unconscious ego, become completely aware, have access to our higher selves, higher consciousness, and what that would look like for humanity. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And yeah, I think, there are kind of some utopian potentials that could happen there. I really think that's possible, because the things that prevent utopian ideals are the conflicts and the fear and the sort of self-centric mentality that ego has. So, ego says that there are boundaries. You must institute boundaries. You must institute rules and regulations, and things have to be a certain way. And in theory, if those things weren't motivated by the ego anymore, I think you could see a radically different way of living, way of life. And then the question is, well, is that where we would want to go? Does that make sense? What are the drawbacks? But I hope, actually, that it's moving in that direction at some point, and that may be a while. It may take a long time.
Yeah,
it's going to take a long time to overcome the ego structures. You got to think about, government and law and just sort of everything the way that it is, education, all of that. But it's good to do these thought experiments, I think. Just what would happen if essentially every person on the planet was awakened? And so we did not have a dominant ego running the show anymore. What would we do? How would that emerge? Because I almost think we wouldn't have to even drive that and make that happen, sort of like the transhumanists are doing. They've got sort of that agenda, but they're willing that into the future. But what would just emerge if the ego was gone globally? That's a powerful question.
That's a powerful question. And so in my deep meditations, these are things that I think about. And, so my current thought behind this is, I'm kind of laughing as I'm going to say this, is if the utopian that we all describe will not ever exist on Earth, because Earth is not designed as an environment to sustain a utopian in that sense. And part of it is because of the ego. Now, when we come to incarnate on Earth, right? You're coming to incarnate in an environment that supports your ability to exist under the illusion that you're separate from everybody else. And then that illusion introduces the ego, right? Introduces fear and this illusionary character, the ego, that tries to protect itself. And so, regardless of what you do or experience on earth, you're always going to have that other perspective. In a sense that even if we all were awakened, right, and decided that we wanted a utopian, at some point, somebody's version of a utopia would sort of hinder my ability to experience my own utopia, especially if it's an outward expression. And that's what I think is, I can imagine a utopia being the Green Bay Packers winning the Super Bowl 50, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as I say that, and I want to express and experience that outside of me, I am infringing on every Seahawks fan. And I'm saying this assuming you're a Seahawks fan, right?
Yeah, right.
And as soon as that happens, bam, you're out of a utopia. You have created a conflict, a war, for instance. And so one way to, even if we're all awakened and still experiencing life on Earth, is eventually for that utopian to exist. I don't know if there's going to have to be like a very powerful being who would use either that whole idea of unconditional love and acceptance and say, I am taking care of all of you because I love you so much that I am creating this utopian that I almost have to police somehow so that we're all safe somehow. And it's going to be that one being's vision. And because of that, conflict is going to rise. Another being is going to say, whoa, wait a minute, this is not the utopian that I blah, blah, blah. And part of me actually believes this because even here on Earth, we have this expression, as above, so below. And so we might think that the beings that are not currently incarnating with higher consciousness are existing in a utopia. But if we are reflections of the all, you can quickly see that there isn't really a utopia the way we think there is, right? This is just theory. I don't know if it's true. But then the other piece of it is, even consciousness as a whole needs sort of, I don't want to say opposites, but it needs both to create. If everything were just one, either all love and no illusion of the other, you would like you will not appreciate love and you will not know what to create from it, right? And that's, in my book, I talk about the whole idea of considering that heaven might be boring because you're manifesting everything you want without the lessons of the hard work and manifesting it.
Sure.
Yeah. And so that utopian idea, I say that would never exist on Earth outside of you. But here's the beautiful thing, is utopia has always been on Earth since it was created. And the big kicker, it's within. It is within. If you can go inside, which I don't say if you can, but when you go within and you find that inner balance, which it's weird, it's in deep meditation, I get to a state of just emptiness. It's not really emptiness, it's just nothingness. It's weird, right? And that's what I consider as consciousness. It's just nothing, the source. And you're not happy, you're not sad, you're just blank, right? And I've had that experience, and it's bizarre. It's very scary, because even in 10 seconds in there, you want to create something, right? You want a thought to come in, just even if you don't manifest the thought, because it's really bizarre. Like, you have to be super balanced and super okay to be in a state of desiring nothing, wanting nothing, wanting to feel nothing, wanting to experience or express nothing. And that to me is what source is. And source, even in itself, doesn't my theory is source doesn't even want to be born and just sit there. So it creates all this conscious it creates all these worlds and in different cosmos and galaxies for us to experience itself. in multiple ways. And so that's my idea of the youth. I thought about, actually wanted to make a YouTube video about it, to say the peace that we're looking for on earth is never going to be outside. It has never been outside.
Oh yeah, right.
It's just as soon
It's
as
inside.
as soon as you get it internal, you see that you can't, because as soon as, and this is all theory, as soon as I say this is what peace on earth looks like, I just realized I've basically said what you believe peace on earth looks like isn't peace on earth, and that's how conflict starts. And then you're gonna start playing the game, and then you end up with wars. Simply. And I look at conflict on earth and I go, those are two people who are trying really hard to impose their wills on each other. And then they're not able to see the perspectives as they're both right and they're both wrong at the same time. And they're both just desiring, right? And sports, you talk about sports. Sports is a really good analogy for this, in what unconditional love is and how no one is good or bad, right? If the Seahawks and the Packers are playing, right, all of a sudden the Packers are the devil if you're a Seahawks fan, and the Seahawks are the devil if you're a Packers fan. But then the Seahawks are also the savior and God if you're a Seahawks fan. It's like they're playing roles at the same time. And you're just like, but who is really who here, right? And that's how it is. And then they fight, and then if it's a good game, both teams are actually happy. Like, that was a good game. If one team gets clobbered to death, one person's happy, but it's only temporary. Next week, we're moving on to a new week.
That's right.
Yeah. And I've kind of gone over there. I'm just talking. And by the way, we're right at an hour too, and this went by quick, Aaron.
That was really fast, right?
Yeah. Well,
oh my goodness.
We will. I'd like to keep these conversations at an hour so that people aren't bored. But we've left the door open for a lot more conversations. I'd like to talk more about transhumanism and something you're working on that I've never heard before. I think you're the first person to ever use these words. It's called transpersonal extropy.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's good. It's good to hear that off of somebody else's lips, because you would never have heard that anywhere else before. It's a concept that kind of came to me one day, and essentially what it refers to is the idea that transpersonal, meaning beyond the self or beyond the ego, and extropy as the concept of the opposite of entropy. So for those who are not aware, entropy would be that tendency of systems to basically burn out or become more chaotic or less energetic. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of how I see certain things happening in life right now, actually. But so the term that got coined with transpersonal extropy just basically means that once we are able to transcend the ego, there is a greater tendency towards higher order, higher energy, the ability to create grand things according to perhaps just higher power of consciousness. Just in my own life, I was always looking for a way to describe how, since that awakening occurred, life has never slowed down on this. It has just only expanded. So it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast one day from an author who I really admire, Steve Taylor. He is a UK psychologist and professor. And I was listening to him one day, and he used the word transpersonal, which is nothing new. I've heard or read the term 100 times and never thought anything about it. But it struck me that day for some reason. And then the next day, I heard the concept of extropy, or there is a movement called extropianism, which is kind of right up there. It's cousin to transhumanism, which basically states, what does it take to make humanity more expansive, energetic, rather than systems dying out or us basically moving toward our doom type of thing. And it hit me. It was like, that's it. That's the term. Transpersonal extropy is this concept of things expanding in our lives and our consciousness, getting higher ordered, more energetic, more wonderful, basically, more alive once we are in that awakened state. Because prior to that, my life was definitely entropic. So everything was dissolving really fast, going downhill fast. I had no creative energy, no will. Things were dying. I was dying. I was going to be dead. And that's the difference between entropy and extropy, is basically life and death. And I think once we are able to sort of emerge into that higher awareness, that's the experience. At least that's been my experience. And so, yeah, so it's a kind of a philosophy, if you will, I don't know, that I'm working on in terms of what it means for people individually, but also keep going back to this because it's really passionate to me. What does it mean for humanity as a whole? What does it mean for the species? Are we able to evolve? Because you can't evolve in an entropic situation. It has to be extropic. There has to be somehow more energy input, more order coming out of it. And so what does that mean for us as humans moving forward? And it's probably one of the primary motivators I have right now of my research and my writing, is to come up with what all that means for us.
No, it sounds, at first time I heard it was from you, and it sounds certainly fascinating, and I would love it, Aaron, if you can come back for another conversation and we talk about this and definitely more on transhumanism and theory on Neuralink. I can.
Oh, that stuff is good. Yeah.
No, that's
fascinating.
Awesome. Aaron, man, it's such a pleasure to talk to you always. We need to talk more often. And just for the folks who are trying to connect with you, I would say Aaron he's got a website. It's called aaronforce.net, AARONFORCE.net. I'll put a link to the website below. He also
Fantastic.
has a free ebook that he has written. It's available on his website called How to Overcome Failure, 9 Perspectives to Free You from the Person of Perfection.
From the prison of perfection. Right, there you go.
Perfection, correct. So please connect with Aaron, and he's also on Twitter at aforce01. Awesome Twitter feed, man. I'm always so envious of your Twitter feed. I don't have time to manage social media accounts and do interviews and work, but you do it so well. And you can connect with him there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yours truly, Roland. I am on Twitter and Instagram at awake_RA and on Facebook as well. And don't forget to get your hands on a copy of Who and Why You Are. I know Aaron read it. He loved it.
I loved it.
Yeah. I read it. I wrote it. I love it too. And also, if you join my mailing list, you get a free guide that I created to help you develop an effective meditating practice, because it's my favorite thing to do. Aaron, I absolutely love the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. I can't wait to have you back on.
Pleasure. I will look forward to it greatly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.